This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
1. Beneath the Mountain Lakes. I was lying in my sleeping bag, staring at the light filtering through the red and green fabric of the dome tent. Simon was snoring loudly, occasionally twitching in his dream world. We could have been anywhere. There is a peculiar anonymity about being in tents. Once the zip is closed and the outside world barred from sight, all sense of location disappears. Scotland, the French Alps, the Karakoram, it was always the same. The sounds of rustling, of fabric flapping in the wind, or of rainfall, the feel of hard lumps under the ground sheet, the smell of rancid socks and sweat. These are universals, as comforting as the warmth of the down sleeping bag. Outside, in a lightening sky, the peaks would be catching the first of the morning sun, with perhaps even a condor cresting the thermals above the tent. That wasn't too fanciful either, since I had seen one circling the camp the previous afternoon. We were in the middle of the Cordillera Huayhuash in the Peruvian Andes, separated from the nearest village by 28 miles of rough walking, and surrounded by the most spectacular ring of ice mountains I had ever seen, and the only indication of this from within our tent was the regular roaring of avalanches falling off Cerro Serapo. I felt a homely affection for the warm security of the tent, and reluctantly wormed out of my bag to face the prospect of lighting the stove. It had snowed a little during the night, and the grass crunched frostily under my feet as I padded over to the cooking rock. There was no sign of Richard stirring as I passed his tiny one-man tent, half collapsed and whitened with hoarfrost. Squatting under the lee of the huge overhanging boulder that had become our kitchen, I relished this moment when I could be entirely alone. I fiddled with the petrol stove, which was mulishly objecting to both the temperature and the rusty petrol with which I had filled it. I resorted to brutal coercion when coaxing failed, and sat it atop a propane gas stove going full blast. It burst into vigorous life, spluttering out 2-foot-high flames in petulant revolt against the dirty petrol. As the pan of water slowly heated, I looked around at the wide, dry and rock-strewn riverbed, the erratic boulder under which I crouched, marking the site at a distance in all but the very worst weather. A huge, almost vertical wall of ice and snow soared upwards to the summit of Cerro Serapo, directly in front of the camp, no more than 1.5 miles away. Rising from the sea of moraine to my left, 2 spectacular and extravagant castles of sugar icing, Yerapaja and Rasak, dominated the campsite. The majestic 21,000-foot Siula Grande lay behind Serapo and was not visible. It had been climbed for the first time in 1936 by 2 bold Germans via the North Ridge. There had been few ascents since then, and the true prize, the daunting 4,500-foot west face, had so far defeated all attempts. I turned off the stove and gingerly slopped the water into 3 large mugs. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge of mountains opposite, and it was still chilly in the shadows. "There's a brew ready, if you're still alive in there," I announced cheerfully. I gave Richard's tent a good kicking to knock off the frost, and he crawled out looking cramped and cold. Without a word, he headed straight for the riverbed, clutching a roll of toilet paper. "Are you still bad?" I asked when he returned. "Well, I'm not the full ticket, but I reckon I'm over the worst. It was bloody freezing last night." I wondered if it was the altitude rather than the kidney bean stew that was getting to him. Our tents were pitched at 15,000 feet, and he was no mountaineer. Simon and I had found Richard resting in a sleazy hotel in Lima, halfway through his 6-month exploration of South America. His wire-rimmed glasses, neat, practical clothing, and bird-like mannerisms hid a dry humour and a wild repertoire of beach-combing reminiscences. He had lived off grubs and berries with pygmies while dugout canoeing through the rainforests of Zaire, and had watched a shoplifter being kicked to death in a Nairobi market. His travelling companion was shot dead by trigger-happy soldiers in Uganda for no more than a dubious exchange of cassette tapes. He travelled the world between bouts of hard work to raise funds. Usually he journeyed alone to see where chance encounters in alien countries would take him. There were distinct advantages, we thought, to having an entertaining watchman in camp to keep an eye on the gear while Simon and I were out climbing.